Jacob hated working the midnight shift. Sure, the extra pay helped keep his head above water, but there was something about the city at this hour that set him on edge. The shadows stretched longer, and every sound seemed amplified. The hum of streetlights, the distant sirens, even the occasional skitter of rats in the alleys. He knew these streets well, yet under the veil of night, they felt foreign, like the city was trying to keep secrets from him. He rolled his cab to a stop at a deserted intersection, the red light above glaring down like a bloodshot eye. He checked the meter. It was still early, and he hadn't picked up a fare in over an hour. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror out of habit, and that's when he saw her. She stood at the corner, illuminated only by the hazy glow of a flickering streetlight. The rain had come down hard earlier, and she was drenched, her hair plastered against her face. Her clothes clung to her frame, water dripping off her in rivulets. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a simple dress that seemed out of place for the weather. She made no move to flag him down, didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there staring directly at his cab. A chill crawled up Jacob's spine. His first instinct was to drive off, but something held him there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was pity, or maybe it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite explain. He pressed the button to lower the passenger side window and leaned over. Need a ride? His voice felt strange, thin, like the air had sucked the warmth out of it. She nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, and without waiting for an invitation, she opened the door and slid into the back seat. As she did, a gust of cold air followed her, filling the cab with an icy dampness that clung to Jacob's skin. He glanced at her through the rear-view mirror. Her face was partly obscured by her wet hair, but her eyes were what unsettled him the most, dark, unblinking, like two hollow voids. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She didn't respond at first, just stared ahead into the darkness beyond the windshield. For a moment, Jacob thought she hadn't heard him. Then, just as he was about to repeat the question, she whispered, "Just drive." His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to get out of there, to tell her to leave. But instead, he put the car in gear and pulled away from the intersection. As he drove, the cityscape around him began to change. The familiar streets he had navigated countless times during his shifts warped into unfamiliar, twisted versions of themselves. The storefronts, usually so vibrant even at this hour, were now shuttered, their windows dark and lifeless. Neon signs that advertised late-night diners and bars flickered, then died, casting the streets into an eerie gloom. The buildings loomed taller, their edges blurred by the thickening fog that rolled in from seemingly nowhere. Jacob checked the meter again, but it was blank. His heart pounded harder. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It had stopped. Panic clawed at his chest. He needed to know where he was going, but every street sign was either missing or unreadable, as though the city had swallowed them in the dark. The woman in the back remained motionless, her face expressionless, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. It was as if she knew where they were heading, as if she was guiding them without speaking. The silence in the cab grew unbearable, a crushing weight pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words caught in his throat. They drove on, deeper into the labyrinth of darkened streets. The fog outside thickened, wrapping around the cab like a shroud. Shadows darted at the edge of his vision, and he swore he could hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, carried on the cold air that seeped into the cab. His breath fogged up the windshield, but when he wiped it away with a trembling hand, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The reflection in the rearview mirror was wrong. It wasn't just the woman sitting there. It was as if the back seat itself had transformed. The interior of the cab seemed to stretch and distort in the reflection, the seats warping into shapes that shouldn't be possible. And the woman, her face was clearer now, but it was not the face of a living person. Her skin was ashen, and her eyes were empty, voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. He swerved, nearly losing control of the car. For a heartbeat, he considered stopping and demanding she get out, but some primal fear, some ancient instinct, warned him against it. He glanced back at her, no longer through the mirror but directly. She stared back at him, her lips curling into a small, chilling smile. "We're almost there," she said, her voice a soft, raspy whisper that filled the car like a death knell. Jacob felt a drop of sweat trickle down his temple despite the cold. "Where?" he croaked, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his own heart. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head slowly to look out the window, and Jacob followed her gaze. The fog outside parted for a brief moment, revealing a narrow road leading to a place he had never seen before, a dark, looming structure at the edge of his headlight's reach. Fear rooted him to his seat. His hands shook on the wheel, and he had to force himself to keep driving forward, unable to resist the pull of the road that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. The city, his city, had disappeared, replaced by this twisted, nightmarish landscape. And with every passing moment, he realized something horrifying. He was no longer in control. The cab's interior was freezing, the cold creeping into Jacob's bones, but he barely noticed it now. All he could feel was the presence in the back seat, a presence that was no longer just a passenger, but something far more sinister. His eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, where the woman's hollow gaze bore into him, yet seemed to look through him, beyond him. He had to know. He had to break the silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quivering despite his efforts to sound composed. The fog outside thickened, the road dissolving into an endless sea of gray. He wasn't even sure if he was still moving or if the world around them had simply stopped. For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound in the cab was the faint rattle of the engine and the rhythmic pounding of Jacob's heart. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward him. Her eyes, those dark voids, locked onto his in the mirror. "Do you really want to know?" she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Jacob swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in his mouth. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. There was a part of him that didn't want to hear it, that wanted to pull over and flee into the fog. But he couldn't move. He was trapped in her gaze, in the chill that wrapped around him like icy chains. Her lips parted slightly, and she began to speak, her voice carrying the weight of countless years. "I was once like you," she started, her tone distant, detached, as if she were recounting a story that belonged to someone else. Driving through the city, night after night, ferrying souls to and from places they thought were important. Jacob's grip on the wheel tightened. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to see the growing clarity of her features in the mirror, how her once indistinct face now revealed the gaunt, sunken eyes of someone who had long crossed over from life to something else. "One night," she continued, "I picked up a passenger. He was different, like you sensed about me. Something in his eyes, something hollow. I knew I should have driven away, but I didn't. I took him where he asked to go, an address that didn't exist, a place not meant for the living." Her eyes flicked to the window where the fog swirled like a living thing. "That's when I became his passenger." Jacob's mind raced. Was she saying that he was becoming like her? That this ride was some sort of curse? He opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but her voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "He led me here," she said, gesturing vaguely to the fog-shrouded road outside. "To this place where the world blurs, where reality and the other side meet. And when I tried to turn back, I found I couldn't. I was bound to the road, bound to drive, endlessly searching for something I could never find." She leaned forward slightly, her face clearer now. Jacob could see every detail: the pallor of her skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the faint scar that traced the line of her jaw. She was no longer a phantom. She was a woman who had been worn down by something far beyond human understanding. "I thought if I could find someone to take my place, to understand my story, maybe I could be free." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. "You want me to take your place?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You want me to become what you are?" She didn't deny it. "It's not what I want," she replied softly. "It's what this place demands. One drives and one is driven. It's the cycle of this road. The city you know, the world you recognize. It's gone the moment you enter this fog. The only way out is to become the passenger, to let go of everything you were and accept this new existence." Jacob shook his head, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. This was insane. It was impossible. "No," he stammered. "No, I won't do it. I won't become like you." The woman leaned back, her expression unreadable. "I said the same thing," she murmured. "But the road has a way of breaking you, of stripping you down to your barest self until there's nothing left but the drive." He looked out the window, hoping to see a familiar landmark, anything that would anchor him to reality. But the fog pressed in on all sides, an endless void that seemed to stretch into infinity. The road beneath the tires whispered, a soft, sibilant sound like the murmur of countless voices. She continued, her voice growing softer, more ethereal. "You can fight it, Jacob. Everyone does at first, but there will come a night when you'll stop fighting, when you'll understand that this road is all there is." He turned to face her, desperation in his eyes. "How do I stop it? How do I get out of here?" Her gaze softened, almost pitying. "You can't stop it. The only way out is to pass it on, to find another soul to take your place. Someone who's already lost, someone teetering on the edge of their own darkness. Then and only then will you be free." Jacob's mind raced. Was that why she had chosen him? Because she had sensed something in him, some darkness, some vulnerability? He thought of the long nights driving aimlessly through the city, the endless hours spent avoiding the life he had outside the cab, a life that had crumbled piece by piece. He felt the road beneath them shift, the tires gliding over the asphalt as if no longer connected to the earth. The woman's story settled into him, a seed of dread that began to grow. He understood now. This road was not just a physical place, it was a state of being, a purgatory for lost souls. The woman leaned back, her form growing indistinct, blending into the shadows of the back seat. "We're almost there," she said, echoing the words she had spoken when she first got in. "You have a choice, Jacob. You can keep driving, keep searching for a way out, or you can let the road take you." The cab lurched, and for a moment Jacob felt the weight of countless souls pressing down on him, urging him to take the path they had taken, to become part of the cycle, to drive forever in search of release. But something inside him rebelled. He gritted his teeth, his hands tightening on the wheel. He wasn't ready to give in, not yet. Not without a fight. The road stretched on, an unbroken ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the surrounding fog. Jacob couldn't tell how long he had been driving. Minutes? Hours? Time felt meaningless here, slipping through his grasp like grains of sand. The city was a distant memory, its familiar lights and sounds replaced by this twisted, endless landscape. Every mile he covered seemed to lead him deeper into a place that shouldn't exist, a place caught between the living and the dead. The woman in the back seat had faded into silence, her form now just a dark silhouette against the gray. Jacob glanced at her through the mirror, expecting to find those hollow eyes staring back at him, but she was motionless, staring out the window. Her presence weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the choice he was yet to make. To become like her, or to find another way out, if there even was one. The road began to change. Subtle at first, the lines on the pavement shifted, bending into unnatural angles. Street signs appeared on the roadside, their letters twisted and nonsensical, written in a language Jacob couldn't understand. He squinted, trying to decipher them, but the more he focused, the more they seemed to mock him, shifting and writhing like living things. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. He needed to keep his focus. He needed to find a way out of this place, away from this nightmarish limbo. But every turn he made, every decision to change direction, only led him back to the same fog-shrouded road. An endless loop that had no beginning and no end. He glanced at the dashboard, expecting the instruments to remain dead, as they had since this journey began. But the odometer was ticking upward now, the numbers spinning faster and faster, as if mocking the futility of his drive. Sweat trickled down his temple, the cold air inside the cab making it freeze against his skin. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat echoing in his ears like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. "There's no escape," the woman whispered suddenly, her voice breaking the oppressive silence. "The road brings you back every time." "No," Jacob muttered, shaking his head as if to dispel her words. "There has to be a way. There has to be something." He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The cab skidded to a halt, the fog swirling around them in agitated coils. He turned around to face her, his eyes wild. "Tell me how to end this," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear and desperation. "How do I get out of here?" She regarded him with those empty eyes, her expression impassive. "You can't," she replied softly. "This road isn't a place you can simply leave. It's a reflection of what's inside you. The more you try to escape, the more it traps you. You're caught in the loop because you refuse to accept what you've become." Jacob shook his head violently, refusing to accept her words. "No," he growled, "you're lying. This is some kind of trick." The woman's gaze didn't waver. "You're trapped here because you keep running," she continued. "Running from your life, from your choices. This road, it's your purgatory, Jacob. And until you face what brought you here, you'll keep driving, searching for an exit that doesn't exist." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He felt his breath catch in his throat, his thoughts spiraling. The memory of his life flashed before him, night after night spent behind the wheel, avoiding the emptiness that awaited him at home. The fights, the failures, the loneliness that gnawed at him, driving him further into the city's nocturnal labyrinth. Had he been running all this time? Running until he'd finally run off the map, into this place where lost souls wandered aimlessly. He slumped back in his seat, the weight of her revelation pressing down on him. His mind raced, fighting to reject the reality she was presenting. But deep down, a part of him knew she was right. This road wasn't just a physical place. It was a manifestation of his own despair, his own endless search for meaning in a life that had become as twisted and desolate as the landscape around him. He looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. The road ahead had changed. It was no longer just a stretch of asphalt surrounded by fog. It split into two paths. One veered sharply to the right, a narrow, winding trail that led into darkness. The other continued straight, stretching into the horizon, its end hidden in the murky distance. "The choice is yours," the woman said, her voice cutting through his turmoil. "You can keep driving, keep running from what you fear, or you can take the other path." Jacob stared at the branching road, his hands trembling on the wheel. The choice. It was what he had been dreading and yearning for all at once. But what did the other path mean? Was it an escape, or simply another layer of this hellish loop? He glanced at the woman. Her face had softened, no longer the spectral mask that had haunted him since she first entered his cab. She looked almost human now, almost vulnerable. "What happens if I take the other path?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Her gaze turned distant, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she admitted. "No one who has taken it has ever returned. It's a risk. It could be your end, or it could be your salvation. But it's the only way to break the loop." Jacob's heart pounded as he looked back at the roads before him. The path straight ahead was familiar, a continuation of the endless loop, the drive into nothingness. The other path, the unknown, filled him with a cold, gnawing fear. But wasn't this what he wanted? A way out, even if it meant facing whatever lay at the end? He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made his decision. His hands moved almost of their own accord, turning the wheel toward the winding path that led into the darkness. The cab shuddered as it left the familiar road, veering onto the narrow, twisting trail. The woman leaned back, her form growing indistinct once more, merging with the shadows of the back seat. "Good luck, Jacob," she murmured, her voice fading like the fog outside. As the cab plunged into the darkness of the new path, the fog closed in behind them, swallowing the road they had left behind. The tires gripped the uneven surface, the headlights barely piercing the thick, inky blackness that surrounded them. Jacob felt a surge of fear and exhilaration, a sense that he was driving towards something final, something that could either consume him or set him free. The road twisted and turned, each bend more treacherous than the last. He gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The world outside the cab had become a void, an emptiness that mirrored the fear inside him. But this time, he wasn't running. He was facing it, driving toward it, ready to confront whatever lay at the end of this path. Time lost meaning. The journey felt like an eternity, each second stretching into hours. Then, just as he thought he could drive no more, he saw it. A light in the distance, faint and flickering like a candle in the dark. His heart leaped. Was this the end? The escape? He pressed down on the accelerator, the cab lurching forward. The light grew closer, brighter, until it filled the windshield, blinding him. He squinted, his eyes watering as the brightness washed over him, and for a moment he felt a strange, overwhelming sense of peace. Then, everything went dark. He blinked, disoriented, the silence around him deafening. Slowly his vision cleared and he found himself back at the intersection where the journey had begun, the rain pattering softly against the cab's windshield. The city was back, the familiar neon lights glowing in the distance. The back seat was empty. Jacob sat there, his mind reeling. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream? He reached for the meter, expecting it to be dead, but it was running. The time was just past 3:30 a.m., as if only minutes had passed since the woman first entered his cab. He exhaled shakily, his hands trembling as he gripped the wheel. He was back. But something inside him had changed. The endless loop was broken, and the road ahead, though still uncertain, was no longer a reflection of his despair. He glanced into the rearview mirror one last time. The back seat was still empty, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't see the void staring back at him. He saw himself, tired but alive, with a flicker of hope in his eyes. With a deep breath, Jacob put the car in drive and pulled away from the intersection, the city lights guiding him forward into the unknown. The city was still as Jacob drove on, its streets unfurling before him in a way that felt both familiar and utterly alien. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and gleaming under the street lights. He could hear the faint hum of the city waking up to the early hours of morning. Cars in the distance, the buzz of neon signs, the occasional echo of a lone pedestrian. Everything was as it should be, yet nothing felt the same. The back seat was empty. The woman was gone, and with her, the icy presence that had clung to him for what felt like an eternity. But even though he was alone, he couldn't shake the feeling that the road still had more to show him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, steady now, though his mind was anything but. What had he just gone through? Was it real? Was it a nightmare conjured by the dark corners of his psyche? He had no answers, only the haunting echo of the woman's words, urging him to confront what he had been running from. He found himself driving toward the outskirts of the city, where the buildings thinned, replaced by empty lots and forgotten streets. The world outside grew quieter, the city's pulse slowing as if taking a final, deep breath. He didn't know where he was going, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. There was a calmness in the uncertainty, a sense that this was the road he was meant to take. The cab rolled to a stop in front of an old building, a crumbling relic from a past era. It was a place he had avoided for years, a place that held the fragments of a life he had once known, but had buried beneath layers of denial and regret. His old apartment. He stared at it, feeling the weight of memories pressing against his chest. The fights, the silences, the nights spent here before he took to the city streets in search of escape. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence in the cab deafening. He had not planned to come here, yet here he was, the road guiding him back to where it all began. With a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped out. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant rain. He walked toward the entrance, his footsteps echoing against the cracked concrete. Inside, the building was, as he remembered, dark, narrow hallways leading to places long forgotten. He climbed the stairs, each step a journey back through time, through choices and regrets that had brought him to this moment. When he reached the door of his old apartment, he hesitated. It was just a door, but it held the weight of everything he had run from. He reached out, his hand trembling, and turned the knob. It opened easily, revealing the dim interior. He stepped inside, each movement stirring up faint memories. There was the old couch, where he had spent countless hours, lost in thought. The kitchen table, where he had sat alone, night after night. The silence between him and the woman he once loved, growing wider until it consumed them both. And there, in the far corner, the door to the bedroom, a room that had held both their happiest and darkest moments. He walked toward it, his heart pounding with each step. He reached for the handle, the metal cold against his skin, and pushed the door open. The room was dark, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. An object sitting on the bed, something out of place in the scene of his past life. It was a small box, plain and unmarked, sitting in the center of the bed as if waiting for him. He approached it slowly, his mind racing with questions. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the box, lifting the lid with careful hands. Inside, he found something he had forgotten he even had, an old photograph. He picked it up, his breath catching in his throat. It was a picture of him and his wife, taken on their wedding day. They were young, full of hope and dreams, standing at the beginning of a life that seemed so promising. He stared at their faces, at the joy that radiated from their smiles. It was a time before the silence, before the nights of driving endlessly through the city, searching for something to fill the void that had grown between them. Tears welled up in his eyes as the memories flooded back. The fights, the distance that had crept in, the day she left and the emptiness that followed. He had run from this place, from the pain of losing everything he had cared about. He had taken to the roads, hoping to leave it all behind, but the road had never let him go. It had twisted and turned, reflecting the darkness he carried within him, trapping him in a loop of his own making. The final revelation hit him with a force that left him breathless. The phantom passenger, the endless loop, the road that led to nowhere, it had all been a reflection of his own inner turmoil. He had been his own passenger, haunted by the ghost of his past, driving in circles through the labyrinth of his grief and regret. The road was never just a road. It was a journey into the deepest parts of himself, the parts he had refused to confront. He sat there, the photograph in his hands, the tears flowing freely now. It wasn't the supernatural that had trapped him. It was his own fear, his inability to face the loss that had shattered his life. The road had shown him what he needed to see, what he needed to understand, that he couldn't keep running forever. He had to face the pain, accept it, and let it go. He placed the photograph back in the box and closed the lid. He rose from the bed, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. The air in the room seemed lighter, the shadows less menacing. He walked out of the bedroom, leaving the door open behind him. As he stepped back into the hallway, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Jacob walked out of the apartment, closing the door gently behind him. He descended the stairs and stepped out into the early dawn light. The city was waking up, the sky tinged with the first hues of morning. He got into his cab and sat there for a moment, taking a deep breath. He felt different, lighter, as if he had finally broken free from the loop that had held him captive for so long. He started the engine and drove away from the building. As he merged back into the city's flow, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, and for the first time it felt like it truly was. No shadows lurked there, no phantoms watched him. He was alone, but he was free. The road stretched out before him, endless but no longer menacing. It was just a road leading into a future that was his to shape. He didn't know where it would take him, but for the first time he was okay with that. The journey was his, and whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. The road didn't need to end, it just needed to go somewhere new. And as he drove into the dawn, Jacob knew that he was finally moving forward, leaving the past and its ghosts behind.